Hi again, everyone. I am Leanne Wynn here with New York Marine Educators Association. And thank you again for joining us for our three-day first day today. Okay, we're having a talk. Tomorrow, we're going to have some live sessions. And then on Sunday, we are going to be having a panel discussion. But without further ado, let me introduce to you Sean Barrett. Sean is a co-founder of Dock to Dish, an organization headquartered in Montauk, New York. So we're talking to local folk here, okay, which operates the Greater Supported Fishery Program of New York State. Dock to Dish also performs advocacy work for traditional artisan fishing communities around the world while guiding and operating hyper-local wild seafood supply chains in California, Washington, D.C., Vancouver, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Panama, and the Republic of Fiji. Sean is a lifelong veteran of both the restaurant and commercial fishing industries of New York and a lifetime member of the Northwest Atlantic Marine Alliance, as well as localcatch.org. He serves as an executive or on the executive board of Green Wave org, where his team works to pioneer and advance restorative 3D ocean farming, and he recently launched a national Eat More Kelp campaign from coast to coast. Over the past 2 decades, Sean has been named Person of the Year by the United Restaurant and Tavern Owners Association of New York State and nominated by both the Monterey Bay Aquarium and Carl Safina to be recognized by the White House as the United States Champion of Change for Sustainable Seafood. In 2016, he was appointed by Governor Cuomo to serve as a council member representing commercial fisheries on the Marine Resource Advisory Council at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Sean's work in supporting small-scale artisan fisheries has recently been featured in Time Magazine, New York Times, NPR, Wall Street Journal, Vice, Forbes, Nat Geo, multiple others. So in 2017, the United Nations Foundation invited Sean to present his wild seafood sourcing model at the opening ceremonies of International Oceans Week in New York, and then identified Dock to Dish as a breakthrough innovation that is putting participants on a path to healthy, valued, and understanding oceans. And then 2 months later, editors at the Wall Street Journal reported that Dock to Dish model was as the future of seafood sourcing in their annual Future of Everything publication. There is a length of multiple other things that I could say, in addition to a featured-length award-winning documentary on community fisheries of Sean's work, which debuted in numerous film festivals in 2020. But without further ado, I will let Sean go ahead and speak, and I will, on the back end, share with you the webpage whenever it is so desired. So please let us all welcome Sean Barrett.
Let me take this off of mute. Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Barrett. Wow, Leanne, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me tonight. It's great to be here with everybody. And what a lengthy intro that was. I think you summed it all up there. Yeah, that's basically Dock to Dish in a nutshell. But yeah, I'm really happy to be here tonight and talk to you guys a little bit about the work that we do. And it's really, for all of that fanfare, what we do is really actually pretty simple. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Community Supported Agriculture, or CSAs. And about 10 years ago, we had long been trying to figure out a way to reconnect our communities in Eastern Long Island with the commercial fishery. So growing up, in the early 80s, like in the port of Shinnecock, I remember and I knew what a robust commercial fishing town and what local seafood was all about. Basically, Dock to Dish, having fish that was caught locally in the daytime was what you had for dinner that night. And it was seasonal, it was sustainable, it was artisanal, transparency. There's a lot of things inherently in the old system that we grew up on as kids that had changed by the time that I got out of college, and the whole marketplace essentially had really changed dramatically, to the point that by about 2010, just statistically speaking, the United States, we were importing like over 90% of the seafood in the United States. So if you imagine 9 out of 10 items, whether it be at a restaurant or at a seafood counter, if you knew local fisheries really well, and then you went up to a restaurant or you went to a supermarket and saw that 90% of the options there were foreign and things you knew were not local, not seasonal, often not sustainable. So that had kind of given me this drive. A few of my buddies, we were always trying to figure out, like, how can we reconnect the community and the restaurants with with the local fishery. And so on the east end of Long Island is one of the oldest community supported agriculture programs called Quail Hill. And I often tell the story of Dr. Dish as really a tale of two hills. And that first hill is Quail Hill. So Quail Hill is a small organic CSA operation in Amagansett with a legendary farmer there named Scott Chasky. He's kind of a farmer poet, really interesting guy. He's written a couple of amazing books. One of them is called This Common Ground, which is kind of just life on an organic farm. But in that book, he talks a lot about the mechanics of community supported agriculture and how it really is an effective tool to reconnect communities to their farms, to local farmers. So I had known about Scott for a lot of years. Obviously, we grew up with CSAs. I was very kind of inculcated into the East End culture, and we were comfortable with a CSA. I'm sure everyone knows, but you basically sign up for a membership at a local farm. And instead of going to a supermarket where you can kind of cherry pick things you want from all over the place, a CSA will directly tie you to the farm that's closest to you. And then you're also, by signing up and paying in advance for a full season, you surrender your right to ask for anything, or especially not to demand anything. So you're basically at the mercy of what the farmer and the farm is producing and the seasons. So it's a much more natural, sustainable, synchronized way of sourcing your vegetables and your produce. So I went and met with Scott. I read his book, and I just remember thinking it's kept me up late one night. And I thought to myself, like, I think we could probably use this same format, this membership-based format for seafood. And instead of people signing up for a season of vegetables, they sign up for a season of fish. So I met with Scott. We had a great long walk and talk, and he's a really spiritual fellow. He gave me a lot of good advice, and I remember leaving that meeting, and he gave me his blessing and said he would support it. And we kind of set up this like kind of just light agreement that we would be able to have our seafood would be able to be picked up every week with the farm shares. So a lot of the people who were existing members at Scott's Farm became members of the first community supported fishery program in New York, which is how Dr. Dish began. And so that was really the one hill. I got together with a bunch of my friends who were commercial fishermen in Montauk, and we started a pilot program, and it literally took off like a rocket ship. Like once people started to experience, same day, super fresh, really well handled wild seafood that we were providing, word of mouth got around, and we suddenly found ourselves like this huge waiting list. Like people were really very, very excited about this concept. So we also caught the attention of a really amazing and inspirational chef, Dan Barber. And he's kind of a founder of one of the early pioneers of the farm to table cuisine and philosophy and thinking. So through friends of a friend and connections we had at Blue Hill to Dan, I went and I met with him, And that became the other Blue Hill became, in the tale of two hills, that's hill number two. And it's kind of interesting that a farmer, Scott Chasky, and a chef, Dan Barber, had really, what we did was borrow a lot of the mechanics of what those guys were doing on land and just applied a lot of that to seafood. It was really almost a translation, where we basically farm to table became Dock to Dish, community supported agriculture became community supported fisheries, and even their mantra of know your farmer, we converted into know your fisherman. That really became the battle cry of Dock to Dish as we began to open these programs. Dan introduced us to like a dozen of the best chefs around. So Eric Repair and Thomas Keller and all these like crazy talented chefs that their restaurants actually became members of the Dock to Dish program. And then ultimately the Google Corporation in Chelsea, which is about 7,000 employees there. They have a very forward-thinking foods program, and executive chef there named Mike Worster, he became an institutional client or member of Dock to Dish. So we really had this magic carpet ride, kind of interesting and fun and exciting and often mind-blowing to me, that it was something that started so simple and so small. But then inevitably we began opening satellite programs all over the US, out into Fiji, as Leanne said, all through Central America. We now have a sibling program that we helped get started in South Africa called Hook to Cook. You know, it's a kind of spin-off of Dock to Dish, but that program has proliferated into one of the biggest in the world. So just to see this idea, this concept kind of just take off was really thrilling for us. But at the center of the work that we do really is this know your fisherman mantra. And Leanne, if you can maybe I'll put this in the chat, but probably the most important thing that we do is to get the identity of our commercial fishermen. So I'd be curious to know, most people know different things about fish or different things about seafood, but even people who I meet who love seafood and are really knowledgeable about fish and sustainability, they may have, you know, all types of sustainability criteria. But I'll ask them, like, do you know a fisherman? Have you ever met a fisherman? And it's shocking to me often how frequently the answer is no, I don't, or they don't know the name of, you know, or the boat or where it came from. So really at the center of what we made the focus of our work to this day is to connect the consumer with the actual harvester. And so because of the nature of our membership program, we really are able to maintain only 3 hands in the chain of custody. So a fisherman, and then a manager or a member of my team, and then the end consumer. And in that very short chain of custody, it's easy for us to maintain, you know, crystal clear transparency and this know your fisherman kind of mission that we're on, to make sure that you know that this is rod and reel caught fluke that came from the FV Allison Lisa from Captain Bruce Beckwith, and you probably are going to know some information about Bruce and his family. So we do a really kind of aggressive job at curating the seafood too, and making sure that the story of the fisherman gets through. And when that first began, especially in Montauk and Sag Harbor, Amagansett, we were really kind of interested. It was amazing to see that it was like a revival or a renaissance of the way that things had been, you know, generations ago, where a lot of our fishermen would be in town, or they'd be at church, or you know, they'd be out on the docks, and people would know, like, hey, Captain Miller, I had your mahi from Dock to Dish last week. It was amazing. And that the members started to get to really know the commercial fishermen again and start to forge relationships with the actual harvesters. And so to this day, I think, and you know, the chefs are another great example of this. Dan Barber and I were emailing a week or two ago about, we handle all the seafood for their resource program right now. And he knows, like, he has personal relationships with a dozen of our fishermen and knows all about their families, all about their boats, all about, and has like a deep understanding and knowledge. And so we really also saw this happen in the land farm to table space, but there's something really, it's almost inexplainable, but it's a fact, and it happens that when you're having a seafood dish, and you actually know exactly where it came from and the pedigree and background information of like the boat, the fisherman, and all that kind of information, somehow it ends up being a more kind of fulfilling seafood experience. And people really have this kind of loyalty to Dr. Dish programs. They will tell you that like it's the best fish they've ever had. And we know that, like, is it caught in a very sustainable way? Is it handled with the best of care? Yes. Is it extremely fresh? All those things, yes, are true. But it's also knowing your fishermen, knowing the story, and being able to close your eyes and imagine kind of the story that goes with the fish that kind of results in this different type of seafood experience. And that's really what we've tried to deliver. And a beautiful kind of cascading effects that have come from that are all these really important sustainability criteria. Now, there's hundreds of ways to gauge sustainability. Luckily for us here in the United States, we are seen as the government, as we heard, is crazy, as we know, and does not do a lot of things terribly well. But one thing that the United States does do very well is manage fisheries. And so we have numerous bodies, federal bodies, state regulatory bodies that oversee. It's the most regulated fisheries in the world. There's a few smaller ones in places that may have that's open for debate, but it is since in the last 30 years, we've rebuilt, like in the mid-Atlantic region where we are, I think there's now 32 species of fish that have been rebuilt to sustainable populations. So they may not have MSC certifications. There's a little more of a complex criteria in there, but these are stocks that have been rebuilt to a level that's sustainable, meaning the way we describe that and explain it is that it's almost like, I've heard this is nice. I don't know if it's true, but it sounds nice. If you have a bank account where you can leave the principal the same and just kind of use the interest, that's how the United States manages their fish stock. So we basically have to get a certain amount of biomass that will allow that stock to reproduce at a healthy and theoretically indefinite level. And then we're only allowed to really harvest or catch what's above that biomass level. So every fish that we catch has to be immediately reported and entered into an electronic database system that in real time manages the quota. So when we get close to the quota that's allocated for a certain species, we'll get a warning. And if we go over the quota, we'll actually owe that in the next cycle. So it's a really complex, advanced way to manage fisheries. But the good news is this is the first generation in many where we're actually having more fish than less. And there's been this kind of resurgence of what we do basically, which is local, artisanal, traceable, sustainable wild seafood. And I think most exciting and kind of important over the last couple of years, and this is a lot of the work that we now do with kelp farming, is carbon and climate. I mean, carbon footprints on seafood, people rarely take into effect that or account that, fish that goes in an airplane, for example, and flies to get from point A to point B, that the amount of carbon that's being put out into the atmosphere for seafood, especially when it travels in styrofoam on ice, from where all these exotic places and arriving here, that is thoroughly unsustainable. It really does no longer matter how that fish was caught. It might have been caught in the most sustainable way. It might be a very abundant and sustainable fish stock, but the route of transport has recently risen to be very front of mind in a lot of the sustainability conversations we're having, because obviously climate change is very real. We're seeing it in fisheries a lot faster and sooner, I think, than you see it on land. We're seeing migration patterns shift. And I was talking to a buddy of mine last summer about, like, we are seeing southern species that have moved up entire populations. So lobster have moved all the way out of the New York area up into the Gulf of Maine. And we're having like black sea bass, for example, which historically was a very Carolina fish. Population that was pretty much rooted there. So we had black sea bass in our area for a long, long time, but not the way the whole population has basically, we're now overrun with black sea bass. And that causes all types of other problems with they're very predatory, eating, you know, clearing out the nurseries for other species and things like that. So climate change is real. We're seeing it happen in the water temperatures rising and the migration patterns changing. And but one of my buddies said, you know, because it's underwater and it's invisible, most people can't really see it or feel it or understand it yet. But it would be like if you were standing at the Eiffel Tower and a herd of zebra and wildebeest came by, and you'd be like, wait a minute, like that's the equivalent of what's happening with a lot of our fish stocks. So the point of my bringing that up is that carbon footprints is becoming an emerging like front runner in the criteria for sustainable seafood. And there really is no smaller carbon footprint than your local community supported fishery. And if you know, when you do food miles and carbon footprints and things like that, Dr. Dish has just emerged as a real like best in show in that spot. So yeah, that's pretty much us in a nutshell. I think and if you look, Leanne, we just had that link. I don't know if you can put it up, but I would say this is one of the coolest things. And if you guys ever have time to scroll through here, you'll see it's called Meet the Fleet. And yeah, under here, exactly. So Captain Reid, Captain Beckwith, Captain Doyle, each of these guys has a really interesting story. Captain Fromm's a great example. If you can click on him, he's a good friend of mine, Captain Fromm. He's a rod and reel tuna fisherman who fishes on the Flying Dutchman is his boat. And he's like, you know, they are really, most of them highly specialized, very good at what they do. And what we've been able to put together, the gravitational pull of Dr. Dish in the fisheries is that we will put together really the best of the best fishermen. And so all these guys, Captain Aldridge, who you see there, he's got a really interesting story. He went overboard about 4 years ago now, and he spent about 12 hours out at sea before they found him. But all of these guys have these really incredibly interesting stories, backgrounds, specialties, skill sets, interests. A lot of them know really good recipes. Some of them, like Captain Bruce Beckwith and his son PJ, they're 13th and 14th generation East Hampton fishermen. So they can trace their lineage back, which is really, really rare in the world, that, or at least in our area, or as far as I know, there's not that many people who can trace their ancestors back the way that have been fishing like one set industry for 400 years. Captain Bruce knows the boat that his ancestors came over on from England and can tell you all the passed down wisdom and tradition that has 400 years of fishing. And or his family originally had their fishing license in Montauk from the Queen of England. So that type of like ancestral legacy information I just find is fascinating. But for the most part, people don't know, before Dr. Dish came along, really, we're not really able to access that type of information. There wasn't really this type of know your fisherman mentality and attaching the name and the fisherman to the fish. And I think I'll close on this, is that what we also have come to understand is that these guys are very sensitive and protective of their reputations. So once their names started to travel with their fish, you started to see this whole flourishing, blossoming change in behavior, where they started to use more ice, do things like bleed their fish, and ultimately became like a much better overall product, seafood product. So it was just, we like to say, a win-win-win when the Dr. Dish program really got up on its legs. So I also have another really exciting, thrilling kind of work we're doing in kelps. In kelp farms. Yesterday, we just finished the first 17 3D kelp farms in Eastern Long Island that are doing incredible work with sequestering nitrogen and carbon That organization is called greenwave.org. So if you guys have a chance to check them out, I could go on and on about our work at Greenwave, but that's really going to be the future, is restorative, regenerative ocean farming in our area. And at Greenwave, we'd like to say we're getting by with a little kelp from our friends. So that's pretty much our work in a nutshell. I'd love to see if you guys have any questions I would be able to answer. And again, I just want to say I'm really grateful and appreciate all the work that you guys are doing, and especially thanks for inviting me here tonight to talk to you a little bit about what we do at Dr. Dish. And yeah, here's Greenwave. Totally mind-blowing, amazing work that these guys are doing. This is really the future, I think, of where we're going to be getting our food from the sea, or seafood is going to start to look a lot more green in the coming generations with ocean vegetables. So yeah, I'm Sean, over and out.
Thanks, Sean. That was great.
Thank you so much. So at this time, first of all, thank you. Let's take some questions. If anyone has questions.
Cool.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, Sean. I learned quite a lot, and I just recently saw a program on TV about bleeding fish and how much better the fish stay preserved and taste, and you don't get that lactic acid buildup, and that makes the fish so desirable and sought after. And I'm just really so happy to hear that the sustainable seafood industry is really coming about, as it were. It's really organizing through your efforts into an industry, a small local grassroots industry that we all can better from, and make more educated and informed decisions about what we eat. And the second thing that you just now mentioned was the marine algae industry that's building up. And that's terrific, because that's already done on the West Coast, and I think it's a very good food that we should be eating more of. It's extremely healthy. And as a former Peace Corps volunteer in Chile, planting seaweed in the ocean, I can't agree with the development of this industry more. So I learned a lot, and I'm very happy and excited to see that your company is moving ahead, moving forward in such a positive way. And I do feel that people are still in need of education, but everywhere, like when you go into the supermarket or in other venues, so that they can see it as frequently as they see information about poultry and beef. And so that's still coming about, but I think what you've done is terrific. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Feo fighter, gotta love it. So Sarah, I think Sarah, you had a question?
I did, thank you. So Sean, when you started talking, you were talking about the east end of Long Island and Amagansett, and I was getting all excited. I live in Brooklyn, and then I started to think, and I was also thinking about the people at Google, transporting the fish. I mean, it's not flying it around the world, but even from the east end of Long Island to Manhattan, I started to think about the carbon footprint, and then you mentioned that later. So I was wondering, do you tie like, Western Long Island fishermen with Brooklyn and Queens, or do those fish have to come from the East End?
Great question. Yeah, and so those fish have to come from the East End. There's what we call a demarcation line in Nassau County where, and this goes back to, I believe that this is rooted in the DDT pollution in the Hudson River in the 1980s with striped bass and things like that. But you cannot commercial fish in points to the west in a certain part of like Long Island, mostly Long Island Sound. So all of our, unfortunately, our headquarters is in Montauk, and we do have to transport. But the really dramatic, like staggering difference is if it's on ground transport versus the air. When you start to do the calculations for as soon as something gets into an airplane, it's not only the amount of carbon that the jet fuel burns to get those planes in the air and carry that weight, but it's also the altitude that they're putting that carbon and all these other kind of like pollutants into the atmosphere that's totally devastating. So when we do, actually the Monterey Bay Aquarium now has a carbon footprint calculator that you can put your seafood in there and kind of calculate what the carbon footprint is. When you evaluate just a short trip by land, by road, we also consolidated all of our deliveries into 1 day per week. We would just do one big delivery on Wednesday, Google and all the rest of the restaurants. And then we aggressively offset our carbon as well. So that's where the kelp farms come in, where we've just put in probably over maybe about 3 miles of kelp line all around Long Island. So when you start to add up how much carbon, we're gonna end up being a carbon negative operation in 2021. But it's a great question, and I love where your mind is at, because we're always trying to configure at like ways, how can we get closer from point A to point B? We sometimes have had these ideas of like, what if we landed one of our boats at the South Street Seaport and just unloaded there? And then we're like, you know, those kind of ideas. So yeah, we're working on, we have obviously operating in a commercial fishery, there's a lot of regulations and safety and things like that. So our facility in Montauk is really designed for food safety and those type of things. But we're constantly working on figuring out like, how can we get lower to 0 and then negative carbon emissions, and closing the distance is definitely one of the best ways to do that. So great question, thanks.
So then when you're making your once a week deliveries, those fish would be frozen, right?
No, that's the big interesting part about Dr. Dish is that we don't accept any requests or demands. All of our members sign up and agree to take whatever is landing on a Monday or Tuesday is going into them on Wednesday, and so they have no.
Oh, okay, but they're not getting it on Sunday. They're getting it like the day after it was caught. Okay.
Yep, exactly. They're at the mercy of whatever's landing pretty much Sunday or Monday afternoon into kind of Tuesday-ish around lunchtime. Then we'll pack up everything, get it loaded in the van that night, and then we start our deliveries. We leave Montauk at like 3 in the morning on Wednesdays. And so you got to get into New York and get deliveries in kind of before dawn. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, no freezing for us.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. So I think next, Maggie.
Thanks a lot. I wanted to ask a couple of questions, but I can circle back around because I see we have more folks. Sean, when you mentioned how the species were changing, I was kind of like assuming that goes into some kind of DEC fisheries report, like so the state can try to respond. Do you know more about, how fishermen can help inform that, how it's going, how it's working?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, that's part of the Marine Resources Advisory Council that I serve on. That's a really, it's broken into 2 sectors. One is the commercial fishery. There's 5 or 6 counselors who represent commercial fisheries, and there's 5 or 6 counselors who represent recreational fisheries, which are really the 2 hemispheres of fisheries. And we meet quarterly to give basically firsthand information about what's happening in each of those 2 sectors. But the DEC also has a very advanced electronic monitoring of every fish that is being landed. So they're able to see, species, any fluctuations or changes that are happening. And then it's very kind of impressive, the amount of science and analytics that go into this. A lot of their data and their modeling. There's always arguments about, they say in order to get the populations of fish. You have to go count them, which is basically like counting leaves on the trees, except they're invisible, they're underwater, and they move, and they eat each other. So it's kind of a very tricky science to get accurate numbers, but I think the DEC does really a top tier job at making sure that they're getting as accurate assessments. The best science available is how they describe it. And so with that, they're able to see definitively that, like, lobster is a great example, and everyone knows of the iconic Long Island lobster. And like in the last year, we've kind of realized that we don't really do any regulatory work on lobster anymore, because they're just all migrated north out of the New York area up into different zones. So that's a good example of something that, you know, the water degrees have ticked up a little bit, and lobsters just started heading north. And now the DEC is kind of saying, wow, look at this, you know, scientific data that's proving this migration shifts, migration pattern changes are happening. So it's fascinating to work with them.
If I could ask a second quick follow-up about when you were saying it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday to your customers, I was wondering if that also suits the fishermen, because it leaves later in the week catches for like the busy restaurant weekend market. Is that part of what helps make the system work too?
Yep, that's a big part of it too. So a lot of that, the Wednesday delivery day, we worked with Dan Barber to figure out for his operation specifically what would be the best delivery day, and then we worked backwards with the fishermen. But ultimately, the weather is our boss, and so we often, you know, it's a high wire act every week to try to figure out, like, you know, Monday into Tuesday, if there's a weather event happening, can really get us, you know, put us in a tricky spot. But over the years, what we realized is that now a lot of our fishermen will actually plan exactly like you said. They know that they're going to fish through, you know, Monday and Tuesday for the Dock to Dish program, and then they have a little break, and then they're back fishing later in the week for local restaurants and things like that. So it has changed the behavior and the scheduling of the fleet. Definitely.
Interesting.
Thank you so much. So next up, David has a question.
Yeah, at some point, the southern bays of Long Island had kelp, and it got wiped out. And so I'm just wondering what species, you know, where do you get the species of kelp that you use? And on that, like, how'd you decide? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. And that was they teased me on the Marine Resources Advisory Council, because I've been advocating and pushing for kelp, which to some of our more historical fishermen is boring, you know. And you're right that there used to be, so it's a much longer saga of what has happened to the inshore waterways all around Long Island, on the South Shore, the North Shore. But a lot of development obviously has happened in the last 50 years. There's a lot of nitrogen loading that's going on, and that had a lot to do with nitrogen creating hypoxic events where eelgrass and a lot of the native flora, seaweeds and kelps and things, and shellfish and fish could no longer live in these little estuaries where they had once been, you know, flourished. And so what we're doing now is we've taken one specific species, it's sugar kelp, which is an indigenous native species to New York. It grows wild. In some areas, like Fisher's Island, it grows like, you know, there's forests of it. And so we actually take spores of the local indigenous kelp, and then we grow them in nurseries. So we have 2 nurseries currently. One is at over in New Haven at the Green Wave Nursery. The other one is a brand new one I was just at yesterday at the School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences at Stony Brook in Southampton. And so we grow the spores around spools of in spools around pipes inside these nurseries. And then we're basically just reintroducing a local indigenous species of kelp back into the waterways in certain areas. Over the last 3 years, we've done a lot of experimenting to test out where the kelp grows best. And what we found was astonishing rates of growth for sugar kelp, more so than Maine or any of the other areas on the East Coast where there are kelp farming operations, is that the New York waterways, the South Shore specifically, and we're just doing this testing now and figuring this out. This science will be out for a little while, but my instinct is saying that it's definitely to do with the nitrogen content of East End waterways that's making the kelp grow at like exponential, like the rate of growth is like 2 or 3 times faster than anywhere on the East Coast. So it does an incredible job with not only it creates barriers for storm barriers. Our kelp lines and kelp farms will break up kind of waves coming in towards the shore. Kelp sequesters carbon out of the atmosphere at a rate that's 5 times more aggressive than land plants. And it super aggressively pulls nitrogen out of the water too. So we ran the first test lines ever 3 years ago. We expanded to like 4 test lines the year after that, double the year after that. Now this is the first year we're actually bringing commercial kelp farms online. But I suspect in the next probably 2 to 5 years, you're gonna see a very robust, rapid growth of local kelp farming and kelp products and food, fertilizers, all that fun stuff coming from local waterways, and concurrently, you know, at the same time helping to clean up and pull out of the nitrogen and things out of these waterways. So it's one of these win-win-wins that we're always looking for.
Well, that's awesome. One of the reasons I enjoyed leaving work cubicle was because now I get to meet and work with so many fun people who are doing amazing things. And that was an awesome answer. So thank you for that.
Cool, great question.
Thank you. Before we circle back around to some other individuals, I actually have a question for you. So mine is less on the fishing and more on the finance. And, you know, a big thing is talking about, you know, making things equitable. And, you know, one thing about, you know, eating more wisely and being more mindful when we're talking about organics and, you know, farm to table, things like that. A big thing that, you know, I have my students talking and families, they discuss all the time, the idea that that's more expensive. More healthy options are more expensive. And while some people might not know, you know, like your family membership, that's like $100 a week, which seems a lot. But, you know, the way that you break it down is 16 servings, which is like $7 a meal, which seems very equitable, which is still a struggle for some people. But my question is, how did you come about with these numbers or anything? What did you take into consideration or anything? And a follow-up is, did you have any pushback from fishermen?
Yeah, great question. So what you see currently, Leanne, those are such good questions. And this is one of the great struggles that has long kept me up at night, is how do you make good, healthy, local, sustainable food at large, concurrently affordable, right? Because the United States, our industrialized food system has produced this kind of strange reality where food is really, really cheap for the most part. And so we would have these sayings like, you know, you can either pay the farmer now or pay the doctor later, right? Like you can either pay the fisherman now or pay the doctor later, because there's such direct correlation to good nutrition and good health. But what we learned pretty quickly was that it was impossible for us to do like local, traceable, like locally processed, you know, all the HACCP certifications and food safety. And at the end of the end, to have a living wage for the fishermen, and be able to put those price points in a place that made sense economically. So we have a people, planet, profit, you know, kind of mantra, and our bookkeeper for years has constantly tried to tell us, like, guys, we get it, like, you know, we're a do good kind of operation, but that we lose money. I mean, we've had investors come look at our operation stuff and they're like, oh, you're doing a lot of good work for people on the planet, but nobody's going to invest in this operation, man, because The ceiling, we try to keep that price point as low as we possibly can. And it's still high, like $7 a meal is still for most folks is high. So I think what you just described, the kind of the way that we break the meals down by portions is an important way for people to look at it, so that initial sticker shock isn't so overwhelming. Because what we never want to be was fish for rich people, or that you had to work at Google to access our fish, or that you had to go to dinner at Blue Hill. Like, who can afford that? So we've also done a lot of other projects over the years, like the Montauk Fish Burger Project, which was the New York's first dock to school program, where we use secondary cuts from our processing to create really healthy burgers for kids in school lunch programs. And then another big part of sustainability is portions. So like the olden days of, the 1950s and 60s, I understand there used to be like these 1 pound portions of apex predators, swordfish, and things like that. A big part of sustainable seafood is much smaller portions. So what we're really working on now is, that's where I keep kind of leaning into green wave and farming ocean greens and vegetables being so important, because the price points there are much lower. And if you imagine what a plate of food looked like 50 years ago in the United States, a plate of seafood was like an enormous hulking serving of fish with a little, probably a little rice or a little potatoes, little land vegetables with it. Now, today, a farm to table or a dock to dish meal is a much smaller portion of local seafood, probably lower on the trophic scale too. So not apex predators. You're gonna have a lot more kind of lower trophic scale fish in there, and then local vegetables and organic local vegetables, low carbon vegetables. But if you go 50 years in the future from now, I think that a plate of seafood is going to be 80% ocean greens, because the sugar kelp that I mentioned, we call that like the gateway drug to 10,000 other vegetables from the sea that are that are farmable and edible. So if you think about a plate of seafood in the future, it's going to be probably 80 to 85% ocean farmed greens, vegetables, and then fish. Wild local fish will just more or less be the garnish. A small little serving of wild local fish, right? Because we have this booming population situation happening with people on the planet too. So all the way back to your question, I think that in order for us to truly be equitable in this space, as populations are growing, and there's only so much fish we can take from the sea, and when there's high demand and limited supply, you're going to inevitably deal with high prices. I think that the solution to that for us, or what we're now trying to advance pretty as fast as we can, is how to pull really good, healthy, lower priced, much more abundant vegetables out of the sea. And that's really where we're putting all of our muscles, so to speak. So yeah, hopefully you're going to start to see a lot more affordable ocean veggies coming down the seafood aisle.
I look forward to that. Thank you very much. So we'll rotate back around. Lisa has another question.
Cool.
Oh, you have to take yourself off mute. You're still on mute, Lisa. It's okay.
I like the idea of marrying the seafood with the marine algae, and I think that it's a new frontier for consumers, and mostly because most consumers don't know how to cook and use the seaweed. And I've been cooking and eating seaweed for 40 years. And so I know how difficult it is to procure it, buy it, and then what do you do with it? And so there's a very big learning curve, but I would love to see someday fish in particular packaged with some kind of seaweed or marine algae that can be cooked together or eaten together. So that's one thing. Another thing occurred to me is that I don't know if you don't cross the Hudson River with membership, and if you did, I would love to be a member. And I'm Jewish and I'm kosher, and so one of the things that occurred to me was that on Long Island, depending upon what stream of people you're catering to, if you featured some kind of kosher package that excluded shellfish, for example, which I well, I won't go there, but anyway, you know, you might be able to influence and interest other people to buy into the membership program. So I just wanted to ask you, because I was wondering, you mentioned about you know, I'm assuming it's a company, not a 401(c)(3).
No, we're a traditional company.
A traditional company.
But we could be a 401(c)(3). We're not a very profitable company.
Right. That's what when you came to that point, then I started thinking, so are you a company that's a co-op, or are you a company that runs like a co-op, or are you a company that has your own what's it called? You know, design?
Yeah, so we're our own standalone traditional American corp, a little corporation it's myself and I have one partner, Melissa, and we have just been partners for years and trying to balance books and figure out. We're also seasonal, which is a tricky business model, but we do have a collection, a cooperative of commercial fishermen who we source from. It's not legally formed into a cooperative, but it's kind of an established, more or less a tribal type of situation with our landing facility. But no, we're just a straight up old-fashioned Inc. Incorporated. Dr. Dish Inc. is actually our bank, you know, on our checks that we write out everywhere. So
and
yeah, but we've done. Sorry,
ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say the Green Wave is a nonprofit. So, and on the board there, it is run completely differently, and has kind of like, you know, there's pros and cons to both ways of doing things. Like Green Wave runs on a lot of grants and philanthropological kind of, you know, donations more or less. And we're kind of left on our own to sink or swim as we're allowed to. But I think that all goes back to sustainability. What, you know, it's very hard to find something that's sustainable and scalable, you know, to things to grow and become. Like anytime you're putting big profit margins in, there's usually some pressures or stress in that model on the environment or on the resource. And so our whole goal was really not to produce dividends in the profit category as it was to produce dividends in the people on the planet part of it. So keeps you.
You might want to consider drones for you.
I love that idea. Yeah, whoever put that in the chat, that's a low carbon footprint. And whoever just wrote that, did you write that in the chat? Yeah. I was like, wow, actually, that's a great idea. And we could obviously break new records with speed, with time. So, and I think that would be, from a carbon perspective, I'm gonna kick that around with the guys and start seeing, you know, we'll run some experiments and see. We have plenty of drones that we work with in the fishery. So how hard would it be to get some filleted fish moving over?
Listen, they're delivering pizza.
Yeah,
with drones, you can deliver your fish.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Lisa, if we can figure that out, you'll be the first person on the west side of the Hudson that we deliver to.
Oh, cool beans.
Maybe I can help you build it.
We'll take all the help we can get. Cool.
Thank you. And then maybe eventually you'll get over to my neck of the woods in Jersey.
Yeah, definitely. It's both too west of the Hudson. So if we're crossing the Hudson, we'll come see both of you guys.
Awesome. So Maggie had another question. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Leanne. I was just typing to you. I apologize. I wanted to ask, it was amazing to hear you refer to seaweed as veggies, Sean, because to me, it's always been like a green thing. dry and salted enough or wet and soggy that I don't like. So how would you advise for someone coming into it new to like see it as different flavors and vegetables and stuff like that?
Yeah, great question. I think what's happened, especially in the last 18 months, is we've had this really interesting advance of a couple of companies specifically. These are small boutique East Coast companies that have really taken a big jump out in front to try to create products that are made with local kelp, but that are much more kind of consumer friendly, because it is, you know, cooking for the first time with kelp and seaweed, there is some learning curves. Culturally, it's new to us. So one company we work with is called Atlantic Sea Farms. They've come out with a whole line of like, they have a seaweed salad in a jar that's really delicious. It's a fermented product, so it's got a good shelf life. They also have kelp cubes, pureed kelp cubes, because kelp has got an enormous amount of nutritional micronutrients and things, and vitamin B, the B12 complex and things that makes it very, very good for health. And so Atlantic Sea Farms, you can find them online. They have a whole kind of shop you can order from, and they deliver right to you. The other really interesting one, and we just had these all over the last week or two, a lot of our fishermen, we were testing out different ways to have them, but a company named Akua, A-K-U-A, they've just released their first ever kelp burgers, which were amazing. I mean, I don't want to over-promise and under-deliver, but their kelp burgers, I think you're going to see the same way that like Impossible Burgers took off. I think that their kelp burger, we've tried it now. I've probably had it too much in the last couple of weeks. We had them for lunch and dinner in the same day, which is a bit much. But yeah, so there is kind of like a lot of innovation happening in that space, and people starting to figure out how to get kelp, more consumer-friendly kelp products into the marketplace. It's out there. If you start looking for it now, you'll see some good options.
Yeah. And Leanne, can I ask another one or come back to me, whatever you prefer?
No, of course. I just wanted to take a moment to tell people that I put those two links in the chat box, the Akua and the Atlantic Sea Farms.
Nice.
Looking out for our health too. I was also wondering, Sean, because I hear about the new wind farms quite a lot in my work in the New York Harbor side of the waterways. And when they always say things like, and we're working with the fishermen, but I have not heard from any fishermen. So I was wondering what you hear from fishermen about working with the wind farms, you know, with the offshore.
You hear a lot. You hear a lot of both opposition. You hear very strong opposition to the wind farms and to certain fisheries, scallop fisheries. A few of the guys do radio tags of fish that migrate up and down the coast, like striped bass. And since the wind farms have gone in, you start to see these crazy, like the fish, I guess they create an electromagnetic field. So the fish will really take huge, like 150-mile, like changes in their migration pattern to stay away from them. So there's certain sectors of the fishery that are like up in arms and really upset about the wind farms, and then there's other ones there's certain fish you know, that like the recreational guys love, you know, rod and reeling for that structure where there seems to be a lot more fish kind of attract you know, there's a kind of a gravitational pull for, you know, that type of structure just lends itself to an ecosystem where there's smaller bait fish can hide and stuff like that. So there's other sectors of the fishery that are like thrilled and they're like, more wind farms, bring them on. So as usual in the fishery, you get a fully mixed bag of like wild, incredibly forceful opposition. And then you've got other sectors. And I think that the companies putting the wind farms in are also doing, I'm starting to hear a lot of like, they're starting to invest in shoreside infrastructure, and they're involving a lot of the fishermen in their work on the docks and things like that. So I'd say it's a toss up. It's 50-50 what I hear. When someone comes to me and says, have you heard about the wind farms? I can literally flip a coin and it's either going to be, they're so great. They're amazing. You know, we can catch all types of, you know, hake
and all these different fish that really love them. Or I'm going to hear, those wind farms got to go, no winds, wind scams, you know, and all that stuff. So it depends on who you talk to, but I'd say it's about 50-50 right now.
Thanks.
Thank you. So David, you still have your hand up. Did you have another question?
No, I didn't put my hand back down.
No
I thought
problem.
you did that. Hold on, lower hand. Okay, very good. Thank you.
No problem. Does anyone have any other questions for Sean? While you're thinking about them, I actually have another one. Okay, so my question is, when you're talking about your nonprofit, okay, I'm thinking in the education realm, getting youth involved, volunteers, interns, have you thought about any of that?
Yeah, definitely. We love interns. And so, but New Haven is where it's located. And we're trying to get, we have probably 3 or 4 intern positions per year, but they fill up pretty quick. There's intense interest in 3D ocean farming, and especially with younger generations. So it seems like every time we put up availability for an internship, we have one opening and we get like 40 applications, which makes it kind of difficult to say yes to one and then 39 no's. So, but yeah, we're always open to, and we love youth, education and getting kids involved and educated as young and early as we possibly can. That's a big part of, there's so much kind of lack of knowledge of the seas. That's why I love what you guys do. And obviously for our demographic, it's important to be sharing information like this, but I feel like I learned oceans and seas and fish and things when I was really, really young, like crawling and walking on docks, and I just, that spark of love for marine biology and for the ocean, when you can get it into kids really young, I just feel like it becomes kind of a lifelong kind of thing with them. So that is definitely on the top of our objective list, is to get as much youth interest and excitement and education there as possible. So do you have any kids? Yeah, do you want to maybe set something up with Green Wave, like when the pandemic is over, but bring the school up and take a tour of the farm or things like that? We would love to have you.
That is great. Thank you. And and just to share on that, when you were saying you had that when you were a child and so forth. I grew up in Jersey City and I never went to the beach or the shore. So, and the first time was in college, right? Looking for colleges when I finally discovered the ocean and grew to love. So it has set me up for the rest of my life. So even, this is one thing I say to my kids, because they're like, especially landlocked kids, they're like, oh, but I didn't grow up around it. There is still hope that it's fine. Later in life, you can find the love and appreciation.
Cool. Yeah.
Cool.
Definitely.
Does anyone have any other questions or comments that they want to go ahead and pose before we close up this evening? No? Well, I just want to say, I feel like I can, speak for everyone and say thank you so much for Sean, for joining us, for answering these questions, for the work that you and all of your colleagues are doing for these organizations. Thank you so much. I'll just take a moment and just share screen for everybody. Again, one of them that you were talking about, you say Akua?
Yeah, Akua, that's them.
Okay,
yeah.
Akua? Yeah. And the other one, this does definitely make me hungry. I'm hungry as it is, but this would make me hungry even after I ate. Okay, so again, you talked about the Atlantic sea farms. So cool beans. Thank you so much for sharing those.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you all. What a great event this was. We really appreciate you guys involving us, and it was a ton of fun. I can't wait to tell everyone that we were in cahoots. So
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And definitely anybody out there and seeing this video, and stay tuned if you want to. Lisa, as well as we're partnering with Hudson Valley Fisheries tomorrow. So we're going to have 2 cooking sessions. Nice. Again, 5 to 7, we'll be here on the same link. so get ready for dinner. This is perfect time for dinner time. So thank you again. Best fishes to everyone out there seeing this after the fact and here. Thank you so much.
Guys, see ya.
Bye.